Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we assemble to explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our 6th season, we are looking at the Avengers. I'm Andy Nelson from the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network.
And I'm Pete Wright, and I am just a pretty face.
Today we're talking about Minute 13, which begins with a backhand and ends with simply another pretty face. Back on the show, we have Phillip Mottaz. Hello, Phillip.
Hello, Andy and Pete.
Phillip.
All right.
Glad you're here.
Yeah, me too.
This is why you're here. You wanted to talk about Natasha Romanoff, a.k.a. Black Widow, and this is our introduction to her in this film. So what is it about her and the character that drew you to this?
I think what drew me to this scene in particular was having seen the movies prior, and she got introduced in the MCU in Iron Man 2. I was not into Black Widow. I thought, I'm not a big Iron Man 2 fan. I didn't think she was that interesting. And I kind of think it's because they introduced her as sort of like, you know, a sex pot type, like Bond woman type thing. And then it turns out, and she also like beats people up and whatever. And it just kind of was like flat for me. And as soon as this scene got done, I was like, Black Widow's the best. I really, I really like Black Widow. And I've always admired this movie for turning me around on that. And I don't know if it's their writing of her character or if it's Scarlett Johansson in sort of like settling in mode a little more or something. But this scene does a lot of it for me.
Over the course of, actually, Pete, you and I never really got a chance to talk about Black Widow ever because when Iron Man 2 was covered, that was Rob and Kyle who were hosting at that time. So we never really talked about her. What's your thoughts on Black Widow up to this point?
I think I felt very similar, that I was always a little bit frustrated that we didn't get to see Black Widow as Black Widow. And that sequence when Black Widow gets to go into the base and have that long hallway fight scene in the last Iron Man, in that Iron Man 2, where she finally gets to suit up. That is really satisfying. Everything leading up to that just feels, it felt a little bit smarmy to me. And so I wanted to see Black Widow as the hero. I wanted to see Black Widow do something, heroic. And so I felt like I've never had enough Black Widow. And I can still say I've never had enough Black Widow. I love Black Widow. And I just, this to me is a realization of Black Widow as a badass. And I actually think it's really great. And I'm trying to say that while also saying I just see the badass in this scene, and I see this badass woman who is dominating these criminal military masterminds, playing the part of a possum victim and is about to do something grand. And I think that is extraordinary. So I say all that kind of leading into the fact that this is a scene that is directed by somebody who has a problematic issue with women.
Yeah.
And is a radical like departure from anything associated with apologizing for past actions. So, so I guess there's all that. I don't know. I guess I've heard people say that this is one of those problematic scenes, and I haven't been able to put my finger on why it's a problematic scene.
I guess his story, like once you apply that context there, right? I mean, it is there's probably something there that the first shot, I mean, it's, how do I say this? The first shot we have of Black Widow is of her getting hurt.
Yeah, right. Yeah, somebody back
and she's tied up and she's, right. And you're like,
pretty woman, right.
So there's a lot to take in there. But then, it's also like the story is, I don't know. I don't want to apologize for it too much, but, it eventually like plays its hand and you're like, that's amazing,
Yeah,
so
that's where I am.
I get it.
It's, and that's, I think we'll talk. Maybe we say some of this for tomorrow in our conversation when the tables turn. But I do think there is an element to the way that the director writes these sorts of scenes, these gender-based scenes.
Maybe that's it.
But to your point, I do think there is an element that does right away, set things up where our character is tied up and she's being beaten, and for the introduction to a character in the film, it does seem, in retrospect, knowing the director and his history, it does seem a little, off color to kind of choose that this is the way that we first meet our character.
And I'm not apologizing for him at all, but in a way, it kind of reminds me of I don't know if it was the pitch, but it was like the thought around the show, maybe even the movie of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where instead of a young blonde woman being in trouble, or you show her look like she is in trouble, and it turns out she's the vampire hunter, and she does that. And it kind of tracks with that. Until we found out the whole picture, it just kind of fit a pattern of like, well, this is like an interesting way that this writer introduces female heroes,
Right.
Well, and it's speaking specifically to Black Widow, like what we find out in the MCU later, and what we know is part of the character's backstory is that she is part of this Russian like cadre of women spy assassins who use sexuality to get too close to and then kill their targets. And so, like, is there anything that would lead you to think anything different could happen in this sort of a scenario? Like, it actually feels kind of right to me that we give her this opportunity to see one of her powers is playing the part of the sexualized victim. And so I see it, and I think, Philip, I think you're right. Like it is only with the gift of hindsight and context that we see this is problematic, and it probably came from a kind of a fever dream of his that he's kind of trying to enact. But ultimately, for the story, to me, it still plays.
Yeah.
Well, and that's definitely a key part of it. It definitely plays for the film, and to that end, I think it works. And also to your point, I mean, her spy name is Black Widow, and that is kind of the nature of exactly what she's doing. And we'll get more of that as we finally way down the road get her film, which I still think should have been a trilogy. I think it would have been better served for her and the story if it had been a little longer. But that's neither here nor there. We'll save that for a future season. But I do like the way that this is set up. I think it is an interesting scenario. We last saw her, and she was working for Tony undercover, and then, of course, revealed her abilities, and we get to see what she's really capable of. And to come into a scene like this, we know what she's capable of, and it does kind of create an interesting scenario. So, yeah, to your point, I do think it serves the story well. It is interesting, but I definitely can see the way that people read this with time.
Yeah.
Well, and they did the same thing in like the opening to Ragnarok has hunky Chris Hemsworth hanging imprisoned, having been beaten and brutalized, playing possum before he actually is able to demonstrate his power. Of course, it's not in a sexualized context, and that's the problem. But it's this idea of you misunderstand what my power and agency is in this sequence, villain. Let me demonstrate.
Not to make this even bigger, for three men to talk about why there's problems with the patriarchy and sexism. But part of it, I'm thinking even bigger, where lately in the last 10 or so years, people have pointed out to that one line in Raiders of the Lost Ark when Indy goes back to Marion and she's heartbroken and she says, "I was a child, I was in love, it was wrong, and you knew it." And people are like, "Oh my God, Indiana Jones was creeping on teenagers." I'm like, okay, so first of all, I don't think that's what they really meant. However, I think that the way that sexism and a patriarchy can exist is that it allows for, again, three men who wrote that movie to kind of toss off a line like that. Or in this case, a man writing this to just put the woman in danger and, have her in a low-cut dress and not have to really think about it in a larger context. It was like, well, look, women get in trouble all the time when they dress a certain way. You're like, oh, that's not what you want. And I'm not absolving the writer of that, but it's also supported by that system that it, didn't punish him for doing that until much later.
Yeah,
for sure.
Right.
For sure.
Well, let's talk about our Russians. So we're meeting three characters here. The primary character that we're going to be focusing on is Georgi Luchkov, played by Georgi Luchkov. And then he's got two thugs. He has the Weasley thug and the tall thug. Those are his cohorts. Philip,
Team Weasley.
Team Weasley. Philip, a game we like to play here when new characters are introduced is the IMDb game. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Ooh, sure.
So what we do is, and this is going to not be probably too hard of a game to play as we look at these three particular actors. But the idea is IMDb lists 4 films in an actor's or a film, somebody in the film industry, what they have as they're known for. And
yes.
Okay. And oftentimes it is very peculiar why they pick what they pick. And so these three performers, we're going to start with Georgi Luchkov, who again plays Georgi Luchkov. Do either of you have any sense as to what Georgi's 4 known fors would be?
Marvel's The Avengers.
That is the number one. That is the number one. Yes.
I'm gonna play that one for all 3. Andy. That's gonna be my guess for all 3.
I have no idea. But what's so funny is he looks so familiar. Has he been in something like massive that
He kind of reminds me of Peter Parker's ne'er-do-well landlord in Spider-Man 2.
Oh, yeah.
Remember the guy who was like, Rent?
Really interesting.
Like a little bit?
Yeah, a little bit.
But only my half-baked memory, you know? I don't know what else I would know him from.
Well, he is an actor who definitely is, I shouldn't just call him an actor. He is kind of more known as a director-writer. He is very prominent in the Polish industry and has made a lot of films himself. In fact, the other 3 known fors of his are 3 films that he wrote: Essential Killing, 11 Minutes, and I'm not even going to try saying this one, Stary Noche z Anna, something like that. It's
oh, you did great.
It's embarrassing.
I'm sure the natives knew exactly what you were talking about.
I'm sure they did. But to your point, he has appeared in a lot of I shouldn't say a lot, but he has appeared in several English-speaking films, English language films, in which he's playing somebody like Mars Attacks, where he plays Dr. Ziegler. And so those sorts of films. So the ones that I recognize, Mars Attacks, he was in Before Night Falls, where he played a professor, and he was in Eastern Promises, definitely makes sense, where he played Stefan.
Sure. Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's Georgi Luchkov. Next up, Kirill Nikiforov, who plays the Weasley thug. You know what? He is Russian, I will say. So at least they cast Russian for him. I'm just going to tell you, he is an actor who has been in the MCU in multiple capacities. And both of those are on his known for.
Wow.
And I'll just tell you, so the Avengers, to your point, Philip, that would have been a good one to start with. Next up is The Americans, the TV series, where he plays a KGB agent.
Oh, well, that checks out.
Then in the TV series Daredevil, he played Aslan in the TV show. And last but not least, he played Vadim Pushkov in Person of Interest.
Good for him.
So,
nothing.
Yeah. Somebody who's kind of, getting in there a little bit. Last but not least, we have Jeff Wolfe, who plays Tall Thug. Jeff Wolfe is actually an award-winning director and a second unit director, and he actually is somebody who does stunts. In fact, he was involved, Pete, in stunts in Captain America, the First Avenger. And I say that just because we talked about it, but then you look through all of the stuff that he's been a part of, and he's he also worked on most recently She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, as a stunt performer.
Wow!
So definitely somebody who's in a lot. But his 4 known fors are The Idol, the TV series, Drive, the film in which he played a stunt driver or stuntman in a tan suit, The Avengers, and last but not least, credited to stunts in Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl.
Yeah, his is not a face that I recognized.
No.
Yeah, oftentimes these stunt performers, they end up in these situations where, they're a person who is there because they're going to get beat up, and that's kind of that's kind of the extent of it. So
yeah.
Anyway, those are our 3 Russians. And now let's continue with the story.
3 Russians.
Oh, but this was interesting. So Georgi Luchkov actually has comic book origins. Did either of you know that before we started talking here?
No. It's funny you say that because I didn't catch that character's name, and I also didn't. I should have looked him up because then I would have won that game. But he mentions Solohov and Lemontov.
Right.
I'm saying those names wrong. And my first thought was, I rolled my eyes and I'm like, what random issue of Marvel are those names for? And I didn't find anything. And I was frankly relieved because I kind of think, my high horse here, but some of my like weariness over the course of the MCU is how like everybody's anything or everybody's something, you know? And I kind of like when, there's just some other people out there that aren't connected to some lore. So, but I forgot to look up this general guy.
Yeah, so Georgi Luchkov, he appeared in a Marvel Comics Presents in August 1993 and created by Mindy Newell and John Stanisky. And it was just one episode. It was the Marvel Comics Presents are often just a number of short stories. And it was a Black Widow story. And he is a former KGB supporter and an informer who had turned in a lot of people. And now, after the fall of the Soviet Union, he was afraid that their relatives were going to come after him. So he goes to the United States and starts killing off all the relatives of all these people he had turned in. And Black Widow is kind of pursuing him and ends up catching him, and that's kind of the crux of that story. It's just the one episode. It's a very brief appearance in the MCU. So it's interesting that they actually chose to kind of pull that character and bring him in this capacity.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Those are the type of things too that I was like, I don't know where I fall on it because it's like. That was a character who didn't do a whole lot, but you did reference him. So now it sounds like he did a whole lot, but he actually didn't do all, like,
right. Yeah.
You could have, it also wouldn't have impacted my life one way or another had they made up some other character name. I'm like,
right.
I guess somebody else.
We'd call that an Easter egg level 2.
Yeah. It's funny that they didn't do it more for the other. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's like with those other names that they bring up, it's almost a surprise that none of that ever gets brought up again in later stories with Black Widow, like, the return of Solohov or something,
I prefer it. Yeah. I really do. I really like that element of off-camera action.
Yeah, to the extent of world building, it makes it more interesting. It's like in the Star Wars films, you don't have to have everybody running around with a lightsaber. Give us some stories about people who don't have lightsabers or the Force. And I think that's why things like Mandalorian are popular, because you don't necessarily have to feature those characters. And
right. And they don't have to have reference up to a point. They don't really reference a lot of characters we do know about. So it's
exactly.
Yeah, there's a whole universe out there. So I kind of like the idea that Black Widow has been doing these literally off the books missions, that we don't know about, and we might not, but we know that there are probably some tough characters. Then she's clearly survived it. So something interesting happened.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to let it build her legend.
So as far as what Georgi Luchkov is up to, I guess he's selling stuff on the black market. We have...
I wrote down this too. It was like, I guess they're stealing paintings, guns, and mirrors. That's the business?
And chandeliers. Or they just decided, let's put a chandelier in this rundown place because we need some light. I don't know.
Yeah. But you know what's so funny about that is like, that is so apt of like this weird appropriation of Russian revolutionary history where people were just like completely looting all of the finery of that, like that is just like stamped onto this sequence, and it's so like it's weirdly fake and yet accurate to a point, and it's just kind of a lot. Where they're trying to shoehorn in this like true sort of cultural historical gestalt onto this weird scene where we just want Black Widow to kick some ass. And yet as a part of it, it's one of my favorite single shots in the movie where the camera pulls back from that weird mirror and you see them all standing in the background. I love that so much. Like, it's so over the top.
It might explain, too, partly why we enjoyed this scene as much, because it almost does feel like a cliche that these guys are, like, it was enough that they had her, like, tied up and they smacked her and all the other stuff they're going to do to her, but we're also smuggling these stolen goods, Mr. Bond, and we've got a death threat. Like, just keep going. It's almost a parody where you're just building this stuff up, and then it is going to set up that punchline later even harder.
Exactly. Because what we know is it's not 1923 anymore, but what's important is that these idiots still think it is, and they're bootlegging chandeliers. Like, that's the joke.
My black market chandelier operation is really booming. I have a hallway guy who's hooked me up with all the finest mansions in
hallway guy.
Moscow.
This hallway guy.
A foyer person. And
it is so strange. I'm kind of surprised that you like that shot, Pete, because when it cuts to that shot, I mean, I agree. I like the pullout and everything, but the fact that it also conveniently has a mirror in it, and suddenly we're like, wait a minute, why are we behind them now? Like, just getting this shot of this mirror.
I want to be clear. Like, I like this shot the same way I like the idea that these guys are bootlegging chandeliers. Like, it's really, like, this whole minute is frame by frame over the top. And the fact that we're behind them for no reason, like, I delight, because it's this weird establishing shot of guns and paintings and mirrors, like, and the curtain is so perfectly poised over the knob, the top of the decorative knob on the mirror. Like, that is, somebody spent time thinking about that hard to make that shot work. And I celebrate it. I'm here for it. It's exuberant.
And I back that up too, because of, the way that the series will go, with varying degrees of success, but of the overall movies, I mean, the visual flair isn't quite there of what you see in these earlier movies. And this one, and actually I really like the way that a lot of Age of Ultron looks. They have, like, and maybe they are ridiculous, but they have, like, these little, not lens flare, but a little sense of flair. So yeah, stuff like, we've got a pile of loot, which it doesn't even make sense, but there's a mirror and we're going to, like, reverse through the mirror. Like, it doesn't happen when, like, the Russos take over. No. They're like, what if we position the camera, like, right here, and then you spoke? Like, got it. In a parking lot? Great. Like, that's about it. So yeah, I'm here for it too.
It's a funny way to do it, and it just, I don't know. The other thing,
you seem unconvinced.
Well, no, the other
thing, I feel like we've done an able job, and you are unconvinced.
It sells what they're trying to do. But the other thing that is strange to me, when you think about it in context, again, none of this really matters as you're watching the movie. But when you think about it in context, they're in this rundown warehouse on the upper level with all of this stuff. It's like, that's the sort of stuff you keep on the lower level.
Somebody carried it up there.
Like, somebody brought it up to this level to hide it, and it's just a tiny bit of it. It's like, is this all they have left?
Everything into that one corner of that dilapidated shack. I want it here for when we have to interrogate Black Widow.
Because this is effectively their IKEA demo room of their loot stash. That's what I get. Like, this is the showcase.
That's great.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It makes me laugh. It makes me laugh. We'll just leave it there, I guess. I don't know if I have anything else for this particular minute. We end as our Russian walks away, says, the famous Black Widow is just another pretty face. And that's where we end this particular scene. Do either of you have any last thoughts about this minute? Because I know we'll have some more as this scene continues tomorrow.
Yeah, I had one last thing just because we went by it, but the general's first line sounds like he's kind of a gargling robot. He has that very low, intimidating Russian voice, but the first line is this sort of like And the more I heard it, I'm like, he sounds like a robot.
Well, you gotta, I mean, you're a guy like that.
It means absolutely nothing, but that just stuck out to me.
I'm going to play the audio for that in this episode so all of our listeners can listen to that too. And
Nie tak ja ожидал провести этот вечер.
I mean, look, he is like, we all are moving in this direction as we age, is that eventually we're going to have to worry about swallowing the insides of our own cheeks. Like, that's just where it goes. And I think Jowly McRussian-Face is exactly Ace playing the part. He's great.
Oh, so much fun.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, Phillip, tell everybody again about your books and where they can track them down and learn more.
Oh, yeah. You can find me online everywhere. I'm at Phillip Mottaz on Twitter and Instagram and stuff. And you can learn about the books I've written, the mystery novels, the first of which is called The Murderous Haircut of the Mayor of Bel Air. And it is about a woman with psychic abilities who is also a hairstylist. And gets into a whole bunch of difficulty when she touches the head of a stranger and she psychically is expecting to see hairstyle stuff and she sees a murdered body. You can, like I said, you can find me everywhere that Psychic Barber Mystery books are sold. Everywhere.
Everywhere. Well, we will have a link for them in our show notes, so check that so you can find them, everybody. And we'll be back tomorrow to talk about Minute 14. So, Pete, thanks as always.
I can't swallow my cheeks hard enough for the bit, Andy. I can't do it. I'll see you tomorrow.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is Message to the World by Anthony Vega, and this season's show art is by Winston Yabo. Find the show at truestory.fm. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show.